So I was talking about the 80-20 rule. The parts that I'm going to cover now is kind of the main AngularJS players. That is the 20%. That's going to get you 80% of your results. I'm going to talk about compile and how Angular actually does what it does, along with digest and apply. This is about as close to the metal as I'm going to get with Angular. It's important once you get into more advanced topics or advanced, kind of deeper waters with Angular, that you understand how these things work. At the same time, getting into Angular, they're not necessary. As I wrote a lot of Angular without understanding intimately how compile, digest, and apply worked. Then we're going to talk about model, view, whatever, so how these things kind of fit together. Controller and scope, view and templates, models and services, and routes.
And Tyler and Roman said that you're doing a great job. And then a few people said that they don't want to be left out on the intro concepts as well.
Right. So it's kind of, on one hand, it could seem like a no-win situation. At the same time, as I see it, is everybody wins, because anything that we do not get to is I will personally make sure that everything is addressed. So, and thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. So the major AngularJS players. Who are the major players in AngularJS, and how do they fit together? And that is the question. I think anybody coming to it is like, once you see it at a global view and you're like, oh, well, it's these 5 blocks on this page and this is how they fit together. It's like, oh, conceptually, I understand how this works. And then it makes it a lot easier. For me, when I pick up a book, a lot of times I'll go straight to the table of contents and I'll skim it. I'm like, what's the overarching theme here? This is, in a sense, kind of the table of contents. At the top, you have your module. So a module is just simply kind of a container that you use to group your code together. Now, when you define a module in AngularJS, it's those configuration parameters and things that you set up tells the Angular app how to compile itself together. So when the compile cycle happens, it will look at the module that you've defined and says, oh, this is how you want this app to happen. And it will go through, and then that's how it knows, like, oh, these are the services that we have. These are the directives that we have. These are the controllers that we have. And then it knows to, OK, somebody needs this. I know it exists because I've compiled this module together. And so it's a way of organizing things together. From there is you kind of have this config option where you'll actually set up routes. So this is any kind of configuration that you'll need to happen. So if you need something to be available through the entire application, this is kind of as close to kind of global namespace as you would want to get. There are certain things that you can put in there. You can actually set constants in there. That's actually a service, but it's a constant. And so you can put things in there that you know, like, this is going to need to be available through the entire application. Obviously, routes is something that is very top level. Just be very cognizant not to turn it into just a garbage bag. I mean, that's the problem, is keep it clean. If you put something in there, have a good reason. Yes, sir?
Would that be the place to put something that you wanted to communicate with your legacy app? You know, if you have something else that you want to communicate with in the global space?
You could. I mean, that would be, depending on the context, that would be one place that you could put it. Or you could even wrap it in a service, or depending on what it is. So for instance, if I'm doing like socket.io, I'll actually wrap that socket object, and because it's coming in, it exists on the global namespace, but I'll actually wrap it in a service and do it there. So you could put it in. So with like Rails, it depends. So the answer is yes, possibly. It would be a case-by-case basis. That is certainly a viable option. I've actually just consumed it directly in a service as well. So for instance, like in Rails, if I had a list of stuff that I didn't want to do an async call, I just wanted it to be available right out of the gates, I might just make that available in kind of a global object itself and then just consume it.
I'm talking about if the scope of your module is not the entire page, and you have maybe you have a navigation piece that's Not part of your Angular app?
So probably not, is I probably would wait until the application had actually spun up to reach back out and do that. So I would have to see a specific example, but I mean, I'm very careful about what I put in there. And most of the stuff outside the application you can still get once it's spun up. So if you absolutely needed it before your application started, then yes, I would put it in there. But if nothing is going to crash and burn until it's compiled, is I would find another way to get it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So config, and then you set up your routes, and your routes maps your view and your controller for a particular URL route. Then between your view and your controller, you have scope, which binds and glues everything together. If you need to augment your view, that's what directives are for. If you need to augment your controller, that's what services are for. And so this is about as simple of a world view that you can have when it comes to Angular. It's pretty, I mean, 5, 8. There's 8 pieces here. And you may not, depending on your application, even use all of these pieces. You may not need to use routes. You may not even need to use directives, or just a few, or you may not even need to use a service. So it just really depends. As your app grows in complexities, you'll start to pull these pieces in. But, I mean, I think that's pretty awesome. 8 pieces, and that's kind of the global map for Angular. Does that make sense? Pretty simple.